I'm bored. Let's read a book. Oh! Once I stepped outside the inn the next morning, I could sense more strongly what I had felt the night before, and what Isolde had alluded to in saying we would be safe there without weapons. For all the faded blue paint on the shutters, the weathered timbers, and gray-painted plank walls, the building radiated order. No barred windows, no heavy doors, no guards, just order. Enough order that it would not appeal to anyone bent on disorder. The clouds and fog of the previous day had vanished, except for the higher puffy gray and white clouds that scudded quickly across a bright blue fall sky. I looked at the inn again. The thick shutters were supported by heavy iron hinges with iron hasps for the sliding locks that would be on the inside when the shutters were closed against weather or other forms of attack. The iron was clean and black, the hinges clearly functional. The red oak of the door had faded under the varnish to a grayed gold that almost matched the big bronze door handles on the double doors that were now folded back against the planks for the day. From a timber projecting above the open doors, and perhaps 2 cubits below the second-floor window, hung the neatly painted sign, Traveler's Rest. The gray paving stones were laid edge to edge from the front wall to the curb, a distance of 5 cubits or less, and stretched from one side of the building to the other. Already the stones had been swept. Glancing up to the room where I had thought Tamara had slept, I could see a glimpse of red through the half-open window, but the sea breeze gusting up from the harbor fluttered the fabric enough to tell me it was only one of the bright red curtains. Then I looked toward the back of the building, but Crystal's room window was around the corner. She had either left earlier or was still asleep. I shrugged and shouldered my pack, which didn't seem nearly so heavy as when I had left Wandernaut, and after a last look at the Traveler's Rest, turned my steps toward the livery stable that had been listed on the wall behind the front desk of the inn. If I had to reach West Thorns, it wasn't going to be on foot, not unless I wanted to take years. 1,000 Ks or more, I still resented Tolerant's flat pronouncement. Someone definitely wanted me out of Recluce for a while. "Watch it, Outlander!" I dodged a thin man wearing a short cloak, a ragged tunic not concealing a mail shirt underneath, and a short sword in a battered scabbard. Then I smiled politely and stepped aside. He stopped and studied me. I waited, shifting my hands on the staff ever so slightly. "Told you to watch it." His speech had a twang to it. Above his short gray and ginger beard, his face bore large pockmarks. The odor of stale beer, dirt, and other assorted filth almost forced me to back another pace. "But you just seem to look like the peaceable type. Just hand over that pack." I stood there for a moment, frozen, not having expected an attack within a block of the inn. "I said hand it over!" I smiled, moving the staff up into a defensive posture. "I think you have the wrong person." I hoped my voice didn't shake the way my knees threatened to. "Ha!" His blade whistled out. "Now, let's have that pack." All I dared to do was wait. The sword edge glittered even in the cloudy light of the morning. "Be ashamed to carve you up, Outlander." I would like to have shrugged, but I didn't, instead watching his eyes. Clunk! I blocked the shortwave, knocking it away. "You know how to use that staff a little, but not enough." Clunk, clink, clunk. The responses were nearly automatic as I concentrated on anticipating his moves. Clunk, clink, clunk. He wasn't nearly so good as Crystal, or even Demorsel. So I waited, parrying, turning the blade rather than meeting it edge-on. Clink, clink, clunk. Sweat was pouring from his face, and he was breathing hard. Clink, clunk, crack! Whoost! Aye! Clank. Suddenly it was over. The small man, not much above my shoulder. I realized, backed away from me, leaving the sword in the dusty stones, clutching the back of his wrist from where I had struck to disarm him. Black crap. Witch spawn. He did not move, but stayed well beyond the reach of the staff. I did not really know what to do. I didn't want the sword. I really didn't want to hurt the man. He was more hungry than evil, but I couldn't exactly turn my back to him. So, up to trouble already, Laris. I recognized the voice, took a quick glance over my shoulder to see Merton strolling toward me. Even as I glanced back, the man who attacked me was darting away down the street and twisting into an alleyway on the right. That was stupid, youngster. What? Still holding my staff with one hand, I reached down and picked up the fallen sword. Just a plain blade. Looking away from him. Good thing he didn't have a throwing knife. Merton wore a bright green tunic and dark trousers. His cloak was heavy, dark gray leather, like he carried a pack, but his was a half slung over his shoulder. He looked more like a clean-shaven minstrel or a bard than a thief, I felt he eminently was. 2 large knives hung from his belt, but I could see and sense the small pistol under the left-hand false knife. I looked up the street. No one else had followed us out of the inn. Merton was right, I shrugged. I didn't expect something quite so soon. What you expect isn't what happens, particularly when you get so close to chaos. He half laughed. I shrugged. Want the blade? You could sell it, he suggested. Me? Merton laughed again, a short bark. You're right. That would be more than a little out of character. I'll sell it and split the profit. That seemed more than fair. Fine, but where? Let's just keep walking. There's bound to be something. Merton seemed much more at ease on the streets of Freetown than on an island. What about, we're not traveling together, and we certainly leave Freetown separately. At the next cross street, Merton stopped. With dirt and clay packed over the paving stones and squarish mud holes, where some stones were missing entirely. The street looked more like an alley frequented by thieves or worse. Merton nodded to the left. I frowned. It's early. Too early for the real professionals. Merton stretched his legs out, moving quickly, especially for a man so short. What about our friend? Him? He was just hoping for an easy mark. Most of the doors we passed were shut and barred with cold iron. Iron doesn't have any magical power, despite the rumors. It's effective because it takes so darn much chaos to break through it that doing it isn't worth the effort. That was what Magister Tirana had said. It made sense, I suppose, which was why swords still carried the day, and firearms were a novelty. After we had traveled nearly 50 rods down the narrow street, crossing yet another, wider street like the one on which the Traveler's Rest was situated, Merton slowed. We stopped before a narrow storefront. The planks were carefully painted in rust, and the shutters were black, trimmed in the same rust color. A square iron hook the size of my fist held open the iron-banded red oak door. Norn's Weapons, read the square above the sign, above the iron gate that covered this narrow window. Shall we? Asked Merton. I tried to sense what sort of place Norn's might be, and failed. At least the shop did not radiate chaos. Neither did I feel any underlying sense of order. Feels all right. Merton hadn't waited for my assessment, so I followed him inside. suspecting a neat and dark shop with rows of weapons racked on dusty walls. I was wrong. The bright space inside, no more than 10 cubits wide, stretched back nearly 20 cubits, light conning from a high roof that seemed more glass than timber. Ranged along the left wall were 4 large cabinets, each standing open to display its contents. First I checked the nearest cabinet, lightly oiled, polished with dovetailed and miltered corners. Made of solid grayed oak, originally probably red oak, with a tracery of fine lines bespeaking age. It contained knives, even more varieties than I had seen in Gilberto's armory. "May I help you?" The tanned and white-haired man who waited by the second cabinet stood half a head taller than me. Spare, wide-shouldered, but his eyes seemed to twinkle. I studied him for a moment, deciding that he was indeed what he seemed. Martin, for some reason, looked at me. I nodded. We were bequeathed, as it were, this blade. The white-haired man smiled faintly. "You're clearly from Recluce, and someone wanted to take advantage of you early." Martin frowned. "Why do you say clearly?" I asked. "Your friend," he gestured at Merton, "could be from Duranzia or even Spidlar. You, on the other hand, would never seek out Freetown. A ship from Recluce ported yesterday, with passengers staying at the Traveler's Rest. Is that well known? Not quite that well known, but known among those who make their living that way." Something about his speech tickled my recall, but I couldn't place exactly why. "About the blade," prompted Merton. "Oh, that. May I see it? You could set it here." As he spoke, he pulled out a sliding shelf from the cabinet. "By the way, my name is Dietrich." The cabinet's workmanship was first-rate, since the polished flat wood scarcely whispered into place. Merton set plain sword on it. Dietrich studied it carefully, then reached toward the base of the cabinet, pulled a small pendulum from the narrow drawer, adjusting it before letting it swing over the steel of the blade. Neutral at least," he set it up. "Would you mind if I pick it up?" Merton looked at me. "No. You're either trusting or very confident, young man." Dietrich smiled. "Merton is good with his knives," I observed. "I suspect you're better with that staff, and I, for one, unlike the past owner of this blade, would not care to test you." He held the blade lightly, moved it around, balanced it, and set it back on the wood. All his motions were deft. I felt my earlier suspicions were confirmed, but wondered how Merton had known about the shop. "Interested?" asked Merton. "It's a serviceable weapon, nothing more. Relatively untainted, but unordered." Dietrich shrugged. "The going rate for one of these is around a gold pence. My markup would normally be 2 silvers. On the other hand, you probably saved Freetown some trouble by handling this quietly. And I am the West Side Councilor. Say a gold penny." "Fair enough." Merton didn't hesitate on that, but he glanced at the third case, the one with the pistols. "You have some interest in pistols? Firearms aren't much good except for hunting. The pistols are scarcely the best for that." Dietrich's tone was bemused as he lifted the blade and slid the shelf back into the cabinet. "Take a look. I'd like to put this up." I raised my eyebrows. Most dealers would scarcely have mentioned leaving customers with a set of weapons. Dietrich had some protection I hadn't detected. The white-haired dealer walked toward the back of the shop, where he laid the blade on a narrow workbench under a rack of tools. Then he walked back to the third case where Merton was studying the weapons. I ignored both of them, trying to figure out the patterns of the top itself. An island of concealed order is almost a random section of Freetown. Behind the front door was a second archway, as thick as the outer wall. A single plank covered the bricks or stones. The framing pieces didn't overlap the plank edges, though. How it worked? I wasn't sure, but it was mechanical, and no one was about to leave this shop without Dietrich's permission. Open and unprotected as the place looked, the cabinets fit some pattern, good solid workmanship that could have taken forever to break into once. They were closed, impenetrable to chaos use. 3 golds? Asked Merton. That's low. I didn't really care about their bargaining, but I did want my 5 silvers. Buying Crystal her blade had been too impulsive, probably, and I realized that I could have used those golds. But she needed a good blade. Tamara hadn't approved. I shook my head, wondering if anything I ever did would ever meet with her approval. 3.5 it is, agreed Merton. Turned back to the 2, waiting for the settlement. Merton struggled to bring out some coins from the guarded pockets in his belt. 2.5 to you, and I give the 5 silvers to Laris. Dietrich nodded, neither smiling nor agreeing. Whatever's easiest. He did not remove the pistol from his cabinet. Merton gave me the 5 silver pennies first, and I put them into the front pouch, the obvious one. Then he handed 5 more to Dietrich, followed by the 2 golds. Dietrich checked all the coins with the pendulum. Chaos counterfeiting? I asked. You can never tell. Apparently satisfied, he replaced the balance and walked toward the workbench. The coins vanished into an iron box, bolted to the bench. Then he walked back toward us. Is there anything else you need? Not here, I answered. Merton just shrugged. Then good luck, especially to you, youngster. A lot of people don't like the Blackstaffs, even young ones, and there aren't ever enough of you to dispel the myths. Good day. He turned back toward the workbench. I looked at Merton. He looked at me, then we left. Outside I stopped. Is Cinch Street the next one ahead? Yes, if you can trust the map in the inn. Good luck, Laris. He turned back to the wall we had come, and I started back toward Cinch Street. The alleyway got narrower with each step, and the eaves on the second floors seemed to lean down on me. A shadow fell across the stones and refused alike. I started and relaxed. A puffy white cloud had scudded across the morning sun, and the shadow lifted almost as quickly as it had fallen. Outside of a beggar boy who scuttled behind a refuse heap as I passed. I saw no one until I had reached the next street, Cinch Street. Merton had been right. Turning left, I started uphill. The shop was gentle, but I had to watch my steps. Many of the reddish sandstone paving blocks had split or shifted out of place. Cinch Street had been added later, and more cheaply. The paving blocks in the unnamed alley street had been of granite and better placed, even though the way had been narrow and neglected. I marched perhaps 100 rods, almost to the top of the hill, before I reached the stable. Felshar's livery proclaimed the weather-beaten sign carrying simple line drawings of a horse, a saddle, and bridle, and a squarish object that I gathered was a bale of hay. The great wood of the sliding plank door was pushed back. After taking a deep breath, I stepped into the building, a wood-plank passageway into an unroofed space. Underfoot was a hard-packed composite of clay, horse droppings, and who knew what else. In the central court, a sway-backed horse was hitched, without a saddle, on the right side. At the far end was a smaller horse, a large and shaggy pony, really. Crack! A whip cracked toward the pony, which lashed both rear feet toward the faded man in gray. The man ducked back from the hooves. Hammer take you! An aura of hatred poured from the liveryman, so strong that I could sense it without trying, and swallowed, then called, You there? Are you Felshar? Get yours later, beast, muttered the man, as he coiled the whip and turned toward me. His expression shifted from professed pleasure, but the hatred boiled underneath. Felshar will be back in a short time. I'm Circlus. How may I help you? The saddles were racked behind the tethered horse. I shrugged. I don't know that you can, thinking about a horse. Circlus smiled faintly, his eyes running over my dark brown traveling clothes and cloak, noting the staff with a frown. Horses are dear this year. I lifted my eyebrows. Oh? The drought in Carthos and the heavy winter in Spidlar. They were hard on the stock, and the few travelers returned with mounts. I nodded toward the sway-backed horse, a nondescript grayish color. It looked gentle, unlike the small shaggy beast. That one? 5 golds. That's a steal, but feed is dear too. I didn't really want to deal with Circlus. The man smelled worse than the horses, and his eyes were bloodshot and kept drifting to my pack. Like a lot of trailers who visited an island, he lied. But even with my growing awareness of order and chaos, I couldn't tell how much. There aren't that many travelers, and there might not be any for a while. Your stable is nearly full, I was guessing, but it seemed right. There are always travelers in Freetown, observed Circlus. What other mounts you might have? I looked toward the shaggy horse. A war horse traveler, and some others. For some reason, I wanted to look at the small horse. A welt the length of my hand lay across the flank, clearly raised by the recent whipping. For the moment I had merely noticed it, trying to understand why Circlus had been so angry at the horse. The animal was well fed and untouched by anything resembling chaos, unless it was far more subtle than I could detect. Whee! I barely kept from jumping. Mean little retard, isn't he? Circlus stood by me. If you don't know horses, stay away from ponies. They're smart. That makes them dangerous and mean. I can show you some better mounts. In the stalls over on the right. All right. I let the liveryman lead me toward the nearest stall, where a chestnut munched on hay from the manager. This one is battle-trained gelding. He'll stand up to anything. I nodded. The chestnut seemed healthy, well treated, although there was something about him that bothered me. His size? I wondered, looking up at his ears. Or something else. How much? 15 golds. That was a more honest price than the one he had quoted for the swayback. What else? Here we have a mare, good traveler, but not nearly so good in a fight. 8 golds. The mare was a blotchy-colored horse, black and white patches across her body, with a short, cropped mane. I liked her less than the chestnut, and just nodded to Circlus. What else? He walked toward the nearest stall, where a hulking brown beast of a horse munched placidly on hay so dry it cracked. Plow horse, broken to ride. He's not much good in battle, gets nasty when mares are around, but could carry 2 of you in your gear. He could also pull a wagon if you needed it. 6 golds for him. He's worth more, but there aren't many caravans around this time of year, and he eats a lot. We looked around at 3 others, all broken down mares. I didn't like any of them and found my feet carrying me back to the central yard. As I stepped past the shaggy little horse, I could feel a sense of tightness about him, but kept moving toward the overpriced swayback. A nag from Winnie was a half whine, half groan. I shook my head. I'd be lucky if the old gelding made it much past the gates of Freetown. At 5 golds, he's a bargain. Is that what the glue works would pay? Circles coughed into his tangled beard, then straightened and fixed his glance on my staff. His eyes widened. He's a long way from the glue works, and if you need transportation, I'd venture. I do, or I wouldn't be looking at horses. But even at 2 golds, this old fellow wouldn't get me halfway to anywhere. Circles shrugged, scratching the unkempt gray and black thatch that was at the back of his head, then spat noisily on the clay. What about the undersized horse over there? That's not a horse, he's a mountain pony, tough as they come. Felsher hasn't priced him. I repressed a smile. That failure might be enough. Walking over to the pony, but avoiding those effective hooves, I stepped up toward his shoulder. While I was no judge of horses or ponies, he seemed broader in the shoulders than some of the larger horses. His legs, while shorter, seemed sturdier. He might be able to carry me. I let my voice ooze doubt. He'll carry you and another, admitted liveryman, standing well behind me. I touched a streak on the pony's flank. Whee! The animal twitched, but did not move away from me. These welts, I shook my head. Still, 2 golds? Felsher hasn't priced him. What good would it be to price him? Most buyers wouldn't take him unless these heal. Felsher would certainly know that. This time I could sense the uneasiness in the liveryman. 3 golds, if you throw in a saddle, bridle, and blanket. I don't know. I shrugged again. Well, I need to check elsewhere then. Circus scratched his head and spat again. Felsher wouldn't complain too much if I got 4, I don't suppose. He stepped closer to the penny. It whinnied again. The liveryman stepped back. Let's see the saddle and bridle first. In the end, I paid more than I had to, 3 golds and 7 silvers. But I got a decent saddle and blanket. The bridle wasn't a bit tight, but a choker, sort of a hackamore. But I had the feeling that the force of the bridle wasn't going to matter much anyway. If I couldn't persuade that pony to do something gently, he wasn't about to be forced. The only other sticky point was the chit. I'd never learned my figures. Felsher does that. Fine, I'll write it up and you put the chop on it. I'd seen the chop hanging next to the boxes where the chits were lying. How do I know? I held up the staff. Everyone knows if you carry this, you don't lie. I can afford to. The price is too high. At the sight of the staff, he stepped back. I don't know. Felsher knows you don't cheat a black staffer, and that they don't cheat you. Maybe you didn't get an outrageous profit, but you got a fair price, and you're getting rid of some trouble. I looked pointedly at the pony's flank. Suppose it wouldn't hurt. That was how I ended up riding down Sinton Street toward the gates of Freetown. The old lance cup, with the addition of a strip of leather, was adequate enough to hold my staff, although I had a tendency to lurch in the saddle precariously close to the dark wood when I wasn't paying attention. The pony's name was Gerlock. I know that when I touched him to the saddle. He did try to puff out his belly, but following Circle's instructions, I kneed him. Not very hard, and not nearly so hard as Circus recommended, to get him to let out his breath. Do not ask me how I knew his name, but I did. That bothered me, but there wasn't much I could do about it. Surprisingly, Gerlach didn't rock all that much, and the old saddle was broken in enough that it wasn't too stiff. The straps and girths had been replaced recently, and I had checked the stitching and rivets to make sure they were solid, but the seat looked like it had weathered more than a few caravans. If Gerlach was adept on the trail, as he was avoiding city potholes, I would be better off than I had hoped, although as I looked overhead, we might be getting wet sooner than I had hoped. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this, please like, comment, and subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss out on any of these videos. See y'all in the next one. Goodbye!